Good morning. I'd like to call the subcommittee on education and CIP to order. And if you would take the roll, please.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. Assemblywoman Carlton.
Here.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdicke.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Here.
Senator Kekeffer.
Here.
Senator Ratty.
Here.
Senator Severs-Ganser. Chair Dondero Loop.
Here, and thank you very much. And I believe we have everyone. We might be missing somebody down there. Okay. Please mark those as they enter present. Thank you very much. And just as a reminder, we do have some people in the room and we have some people on Zoom. So when we get ready for public comment, we will be doing both of those things. And today we will be closing the bond interest and redemption budget as well as the capital improvement program for the 21-23 biennium. And so we will get started. First on the agenda for budget closing this morning is the Treasurer's Office bond interest and redemption budget. And Mr. Leiser, you may begin when you are ready, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Brody Leiser, Fiscal Analysis Division. I'll be presenting the bond interest and redemption account as well as the capital improvement program today for the subcommittee's consideration. Just as a brief reminder, the capital improvement program was heard over 3 separate hearings on February 11th, March 11th, April 2nd, and then we had a work session on the State Infrastructure Bank on April 13th. On page 3 of your closing packet begins the closing document for the Treasurer's bond interest and redemption account. This account provides the funding necessary to pay the principal and interest on debt instruments issued by the state. There are no major closing issues in this budget. On page 4, I will briefly go over 2 technical adjustments and potentially a 4th adjustment depending on future action of the money committees. The first technical adjustment is just to align property tax revenues in the budget for fiscal years 22 and 23. As submitted, the governor's recommended budget had carried forward the base amount for property tax revenues. And so this is just a technical adjustment to align the revenue authority based on projections that were previously completed with those revenues. I would note with this adjustment that this really is just a budget reconciliation item, that the projected revenues were used by the Treasurer's Office in the affordability analysis, and therefore these adjustments do not have any impact on the identified affordability to issue general obligation bonds in the upcoming biennium. The other closing item 3, the technical adjustment here is the 2017 legislature had approved the issuance of bonds to support costs for the engineering building at UNR and funded the repayment of those bonds through general fund appropriations. As the subcommittee members may recall, based on the health of the bond interest and redemption fund, the governor's recommended budget had removed the general fund appropriations from the UNR 2017 engineering building debt service budget, and instead recommended to repay those debt service costs through property tax revenues from the bond interest and redemption fund. So there's a technical adjustment here just to remove the transfer of $2.9 million in each year of the upcoming biennium as reflected on the first page of the document, and would be contingent upon the money committees approving the UNR 2017 engineering building debt service budget as recommended by the governor. The fourth closing item, the subcommittee members may recall this discussion from the work session that was held on the State Infrastructure Bank. There was discussions about how to fund the operational costs of the bank if it is approved by the legislature. One of those options discussed in the work session was to fund the operational costs out of reserved interest from the bond interest and redemption account. And on April 22nd, the governor's finance office submitted a budget amendment that recommended supporting the position salary and related costs for the executive director and administrative assistant position, as well as operational costs for staff and the board members. This amendment would establish a new budget under the Nevada Department of Transportation and would be funded with unobligated reserved interest earnings from this account in the amount of $438,616 over the 21-23 biennium. So if funding for the bank is approved and if the full money committees approve the budget amendment that I just referenced in closing the Department of Transportation budgets, fiscal staff would recommend a technical adjustment in this budget to reflect the transfer to support those costs. So on page 5 of your closing document is the motion for consideration, and fiscal staff recommends that other closing item 1 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 2 be closed as a technical adjustment. Other closing item 3 be closed as a technical adjustment contingent upon the money committee's future decision in closing the Nevada system of higher education budgets to eliminate general funds in the 2017 engineering building debt service budget. Other closing item 4 be approved as a technical adjustment contingent upon approval by the money committees to fund the launch of the State Infrastructure Bank, which would include the approval to establish a new budget account in the Nevada Department of Transportation for the bank's operational costs, funded with unobligated reserved interest earnings from this budget, and request authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Senator Keffer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I'm just looking through the packet. Is this the primary decision point for the CIP program as well, or is this the just for the bond interest and redemption account?
For the record, Brody Leiser, Madam Chair, through you to Senator Keffer, this is just for the bond interest and redemption account.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? If not, I'll look for a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move as indicated by staff in the delineated multiple components of a motion on page 5 of our closing document.
Second?
A motion from Assemblywoman Carlton and a second from Assemblywoman Hadagi. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Brody Leiser. I'll now begin to go through the governor's recommended capital improvement program. And I just wanted to take a moment to sort of lay out the plan for the subcommittee members. As the closing documents for the capital improvement program are, they're just different than the normal operating budgets and closing documents that the subcommittees have and full money committees have seen up to this point. So there on page 7 through 9 is a narrative summary that I will go over here in a minute that talks about some of the changes that have occurred to the CIP as compared to initially submitted and recommended by the governor. Once I'm through those pages, on page 11, there is a table, a set of tables that reflect the funding summary as recommended by the governor, and then as well as some of the, reflects the changes that I will have covered in the narrative document, and also includes the recommended funding for the bond programs that are managed and overseen by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. At that point, there will be a consideration to taking a motion on the DCNR bond programs, and after that, I will walk through the closing spreadsheet, or the closing, this is what we use as the closing document for the capital improvement program, and that's the legal size sheet of paper that begins on page 13. And when I get to that point, Madam Chair, what I will do is I will talk about the structure of the spreadsheet itself so that it's clear for the subcommittee members what we're looking at, as well as talk about the plan to get through the 91 projects that were recommended by the governor, as well as 3 additional projects that came through as a budget amendment. So on page 7, as I mentioned, is a narrative summary of some of the changes that have occurred to the governor's recommended capital improvement program. The first area I'd like to cover are under the CIP funding changes. The first item is that in working with the Department of Administration, we've identified $9.8 million of bond proceeds that were previously issued and available for reallocation to support a portion of the 2021 capital improvement program. Of that $9.8 million, $8 million has been recommended to support 3 new projects that were submitted through a budget amendment, and I will talk about those 3 projects here in a moment. The second item related to funding changes is a portion of the 21 MO6 CIP project, which funds $15 million for deferred maintenance at the Nevada System of Higher Education, includes $1 million in slot tax revenue, and based on fiscal staff's analysis, there will not be sufficient revenue to support that $1 million for that project. We will talk about that project specifically when we go through the maintenance projects, but there will be a recommendation to replace the slot tax revenue with general obligation bonds. The third item is just clarification that approximately $1.8 million that was identified in the executive budget as other funding is actually federal funds, and that'll be reflected in the summary sheet of the funding. And as well, and I should have noted this prior, but all of the funding changes and funding sources for the individual projects are identified on the closing sheet that has the table of all, I guess, 94 projects, including the projects through the amendment. The fourth change with the CIP funding changes is addition of $711,495 in federal funds to support a scope expansion for Project 21C03, so Washoe County Training Center addition. I'll talk about this scope change here in a moment, but this was discussed during the budget hearing for this project, and that was, I believe, the April 2nd meeting that this was discussed, and the Public Works Division had indicated an amendment was coming to expand the scope of that project, and that amendment was received. The last item for clarification on the funding changes, the members may recall that during the March 11th hearing, Project 21C04 for the Cave Creek Dam rehabilitation, the CIP book had identified that this project would be supported with $2.6 million of state general obligation bonds and $6.9 million of federal funds. During the hearing, the Department of Wildlife had indicated that $6.9 million was actually going to come from a variety of funding sources, and that it was not all federal funds. So we've worked with the Department of Administration and the Department of Wildlife to reconcile what the funding source is to support that portion of the project, And the funding source would include $2.3 million of federal grant funds, $3 million from funding from bonds issued under the AB 84 program, and $1.6 million in sportsman's revenue. At the bottom of page 7, as I indicated, we received a budget amendment on April 28th that included the addition of 3 projects, and these projects are listed on the closing document, but the 3 projects that were added were 21 M59 for a central plant replacement at the Nevada State Museum in Las Vegas, 21 M60 to replace cell doors and locks at the Northern Nevada Correctional Center, and 21 P07, which is an advanced planning project for a wastewater system upgrade at the Lovelock Correctional Center. And I will talk about each of those 3 projects as we go through the maintenance and planning projects on the spreadsheet. On page 8 of your closing packet, just to circle back on some of the discussion that has occurred both from the pre-session hearing and during the budget hearings. There are 4 projects that you'll see towards the top of page 8 that have been identified for having a useful life of less than 20 years. These projects are recommended to be funded through the issuance of general obligation bonds. However, the bonds that would be issued to support these particular projects would have a shorter repayment term based on the useful life of these projects. And what I just would note for the subcommittee is that in building the affordability analysis for the upcoming biennium and subsequent biennium, the Treasurer's Office has confirmed that their affordability analysis did account for the issuance of up to approximately $10 million of bonds that would fall under, for projects that would fall under this type of scenario and therefore have shorter repayment terms. There's one project that has a recommended authority decrease, and we'll talk about this project in detail, but the subcommittee members may recall that the CIP project 21M02 is a project, it's a consolidated project to address deferred maintenance for the Department of Health and Human Services. This is one consolidated project that's based on funding to support 19 individual projects. And during the March 11th hearing, the State Public Works Division did testify and confirm that as a result of consolidating those 19 projects, that the construction contingency could be reduced from 15% to 10%, and therefore that would result in a project reduction of $1 million and would be about $1 million in general obligation bond savings. The next item is there was one project that had its authority increased, and I just mentioned it a few moments ago. As part of the amendment that was received on April 28th, part of that amendment requested the increase in scope for Project 21C03, the Washoe County Training Center addition for the Nevada Army National Guard. And just as a reminder for the members, this amendment added planning efforts to the project that would otherwise not have been funded. And the amendment itself would increase the project by just under $1.5 million, and that would be funded with the $711,495 of federal funds that I mentioned previously, as well as $752,853 of general obligation bonds. And in the amendment, it was indicated that the general obligation bonds to support the increased scope for this project would be covered by the savings that would be realized from reducing the contingency in the Department of Health and Human Services maintenance project that we just talked about. The bottom of page 8, there's a discussion about a request from the State Public Works Division to provide for project extensions. As the subcommittees may be aware, the CIP projects are approved with expenditure authority for over a 4-year period. That is memorialized in the CIP legislation by requiring the reversion of any unspent funds at the end of a 4-year period for CIP projects. If a project is not completed or anticipated that it will not be completed within that time frame, the legislature can grant an extension for individual projects, and that extension is facilitated through the CIP legislation. So the Public Works Division has identified 14 projects that it's requesting an extension for during the 2021 session. And those include Project 17 CO5, National Guard Readiness Center, Project 17 MO4, Water Supply Nitrate Treatment at Humboldt Conservation Camp, 17 M18, Upgrade Wastewater Treatment Facilities at the Wells Conservation Camp, 17 M23, Upgrade Electric Power Transformers, Switches, and Submetering at the Stewart Campus, 17 M28 for a heat exchanger replacement at the Ely State Prison, 17 M33, a domestic water pump house replacement at Wells Conservation Camp, 17 M36 to replace domestic and fire water main at the Stewart Campus, 17 M45 to complete phone and data network phase 2 at the Stewart Campus, 17 M48 plumbing fixture and water control renovations for housing units 1 through 5 at the Northern Nevada Correctional Center, 17 M75 water system improvements, the Mason Valley Wildlife Management Area headquarters, 17 PO9 advanced planning for the UNLV College of Engineering Academic and Research Building, 17 SO2 or statewide ADA program, 17 PO3 or advanced planning or computer room cooling system upgrade, state computer facility. And this would be contingent upon approval of the recommended CIP project 21 M44 for the computer room cooling system upgrade at this facility, and 17 PO4 advanced planning for the Southern Nevada Fleet Services Maintenance Facility at the Grant Sawyer site. And this extension would be contingent upon approval of the recommended CIP project 21 CO2, the Southern Nevada Fleet Services Maintenance Building. So, Madam Chair, the first motion for consideration with regards to the CIP would be, does the subcommittee wish to direct fiscal staff to include back language in the CIP legislation that would approve the 2-year project extensions requested by the State Public Works Division?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Assemblywoman Hodeggy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a quick question, just for my clarification, having this been like the first time I sit on this committee. With the project extensions, is that something that's normal? Do we usually approve project extensions, or do we have 14 projects that need extensions because of COVID? Did that have a big impact?
Thank you. For the record, Brody Leiser, it is normal that we have project extensions. These come forward and are requested every biennium by the State Public Works Division. However, in relation to your question, a number of these particular extensions I believe, are extended as a result of difficulties getting out to these sites and doing the work as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you very much. Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually had a different question, but I kind of wanted to touch on what the Assemblywoman just asked. So when we're talking about project extensions, and this is, again, my ignorance for sitting on this committee for the first time, do we reallocate funds when we extend those projects, or do they just continue with their current funding upon extension? How does that work?
Thank you. For the record, Brody Lizer. The project extensions are facilitated through the CIP legislation. And so how it works is these projects in the 2017 CIP bill had requirements to revert any unspent funds at the end of the current fiscal year, June 30th, 2021. And so the way that this is facilitated is that we would go in and you'll see this when the bill is introduced for this biennium, but the language would go in and amend the legislation from 2017 to extend the reversion date for these projects, allowing them to have 2 additional years to expend the authority and funding that was approved at that time. So it would be under the same funding that was approved in 2017, just allow them 2 more years to expend that funding.
Thank you for that, Brody. Madam Chair, can I ask another question?
Yes, please, Mr. Lizer. Go ahead, Assemblyman.
Thank you, Mr. Lizer. So when we're talking about projects with a useful life less than 20 years and shortening the repayment term, is the repayment term in accordance with when those projects' useful life is going to be completed? So, and I guess the question is when the useful life is expired and they're most likely going to have to redo something or start over or replace, is that bonding still out there, or is it been done? Is it completed?
For the record, Brody Lizer, Assemblyman Levitt, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'll attempt to answer it, and if I don't, please let me know, and I will answer your question. Typically, the bonds that are issued to support the CIP have a 20-year repayment cycle. And the bonds that are authorized in the legislation, the state does not go out and issue 100% of the authorized bonds at one time. The State Public Works Division and the Department of Administration work with the Treasurer's Office to identify how much bonding is going to be needed for the next year, and work with the Treasurer's Office and then the Board of Finance to go out to issue only the amount of bonds that are needed to complete those projects that are estimated to get started at that time. So the 20-year period for the bonding begins, upon issuance of the bonds. Now, depending on when the projects begin, as I indicated, these projects have a 4-year life cycle to complete. And we try and look and make sure that the bonds that are being issued to have a repayment with a repayment term of 20 years, that the state is not bonding projects that only have a useful life of, say, 5 years or so. So it really it depends on the individual projects themselves. But I would say that in terms of looking at the useful life of the project, the useful life of the project would probably begin when the project is completed.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Additional questions? Assemblyman Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to clarify on the project extensions, and maybe hopefully I got this right. So a lot of these projects are already in the middle of being completed, right? We slated for these projects, in 2017. There's a lot of work that's been done already. The money has been allocated, and for whatever reason, they just have had trouble completing the projects. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And so extending them would make sense so that we could complete the projects that we funded 4 years ago or whatever, right?
For the record, Brody Lizer, yes, the ultimate purpose of the project extension is to ensure that Public Works has time to complete the projects as approved. That is correct.
Thank you very much. It makes it clear.
Thank you very much. Additional questions? Okay, with that, I would accept a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to direct fiscal staff to include back language in the CIP legislation that would approve the 2-year project extensions requested by the State Public Works Division.
Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Brody Lizer. So if the members would turn to page 11 of their closing packet, what this page of your closing document reflects, there are 2 sets of tables, one on the left and one on the right. The tables on the left reflect a summary of the governor's recommended funding as summarized in the executive budget. The table on the left should look familiar to the subcommittee members as it has been presented in a similar format previously in documents provided to the subcommittee. On the right is a summary of the funding sources that accounts for the changes that we just discussed and went over in the narrative document. And, would just note that the substantial differences are the addition of the bond proceeds that were previously issued and available for reallocation, the addition of those three projects that were submitted through the budget amendment, as well as the scope change that was submitted through the budget amendment. And so a similar table will be prepared following the subcommittee decisions today, then to compare the funding from the subcommittee's recommendations as compared to what the members see in the document here. In addition, Madam Chair, I would just note at the bottom of page 11 includes the bonds that are recommended for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and would like to take a moment to go through these. The subcommittee members may recall that there is a presentation provided, which is something that has not occurred in prior biennia, but there was a presentation that was done on March 11th before this subcommittee about these bond programs. And so just as a brief recap, the governor recommends $20 million of bonds to be issued under the AB 84 program. The 2019 legislature had authorized the future issuance of bonds in an amount not to exceed $217.5 million to protect, preserve, and obtain the benefits of the property and natural and cultural resources of the state. And the governor is recommending the issuance of $20 million of that authority that was approved last session. Additionally, for the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program, the governor is recommending $12 million of bonds for this program. The Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program was created following the 1997 Presidential Forum at Lake Tahoe and is a partnership of federal, state, and local agencies, private interests, and the Washoe tribe. And this program is an effort to support and preserve and restore the Lake Tahoe Basin. Projects are carried out by the Nevada Tahoe Resource Team, which consists of staff from the Division of State Lands, State Parks, Forestry, and the Department of Wildlife. Additionally, the governor recommends the issuance of $4 million for the Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program. This is a program that focuses on the preservation and promotion of cultural resources that includes a program of awarding grants of a financial assistance to preserve and protect historic buildings to be used as cultural centers. These projects are presented in Commission for Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation's plan, and the commission itself will solicit information for specific projects. Lastly is the governor recommends $8 million for the water infrastructure grant program. This program provides grants to purveyors of water to assist with costs of water conservation and capital improvements for certain publicly owned water systems. The water infrastructure grants are awarded at the discretion of the Board for Financing Water Projects pursuant to NRS 349-981. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to recommend $40 million in general obligation bonds to support 4 resource protection programs, including $20 million for the conservation bond program established through the passage of AB 84 from the 2019 legislative session, $12 million for the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program, $4 million for the Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program, and $8 million for the Water Infrastructure Grant Program.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very happy that AB 84 from last session is actually working the way we had hoped it would. So I would move to recommend $40 million in general obligation bonds to support 4 resource protection programs, including $20 million for the Conservation Bond Program, established through the passage of AB 84 from the 19 legislative session, $12 million for the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program, $4 million for the Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program, and $8 million for the Water Infrastructure Grant Program.
Second?
Thank you. I have a motion from Assemblywoman Carlton and
I have to apologize to the subcommittee. I indicated 40 million. The math is 44 million total. It's the same amounts for each individual program, but I want to make sure that the record is clear. My apologies for interrupting, but just want to make sure that the record is clear.
thank you very much, Mr. Leiser. And Assemblywoman, would you like to just put an addendum on your motion?
So, Madam Chair, the motion would be to recommend 44 million with the delineated projects as were mentioned.
Thank you very much.
Second, Madam Chair.
So I have a motion from Assemblywoman Carlton and a second from Assemblywoman Hadagi. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Leiser, please go ahead.
Thankfully, I'm wearing a mask, so you can't see how red I am.
We can tell.
So with that, Madam Chair, we'll begin going through the capital improvement program projects. And on page 13 begins the closing document that'll be used to go through the project. So I want to take just a moment, given that we do have, that there's some members on the subcommittee that are very familiar with this sheet and some that this is a fairly new closing document. And so the closing sheet for the capital improvement program groups projects by project type. So the first grouping are the construction projects, second grouping are the maintenance projects, then the economic development projects, and then we have the planning projects, and finally the statewide projects that are recommended by the governor. Looking at the closing spreadsheet, working left to right, what this spreadsheet identifies are the project number, department, location, project name. The first 3 columns that have dollar figures in them display the funding as recommended by the governor for these individual projects. The next grouping of columns with figures in it and that fall under the title Revised Recommendation for Subcommittee Consideration show any changes compared to the governor's recommended funding. There's only a handful that display changes. In addition, this group of figures breaks out and specifies projects in amounts that are recommended to be supported with highway funds, and for those projects that are recommended to be funded with other funding, identifies the other funding source on the spreadsheet. Finally, towards the right-hand side of the closing document are remarks or comments that provide a brief description of the recommended project. So, Madam Chair, what the intent would be in terms of walking through the closing is that I would intend to walk through each of the construction projects individually and would ask for a motion after each project. Then when we get to the maintenance projects, the members will see there are a number of projects that are shaded in gray on your closing sheet. Those are projects that are not identified to have additional discussion by fiscal staff. However, subcommittee members, Chair, at your discretion, if the members wanted to pull any of those projects for individual discussion, that we certainly are more than willing to accommodate that. If not, then fiscal staff would recommend a consolidated motion to approve those projects in one motion, and then we'll begin to go through the individual projects that are identified to have discussion by the subcommittee. A similar approach then would be taken with the economic development planning and statewide projects. So with that, Madam Chair, I will begin with project 21C01. This is a project for the heavy equipment repair shop and shop renovation. And this is for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. The governor recommends $5.5 million to complete design development through construction of a 7,200 square foot heavy equipment repair shop and to renovate the existing 4,600 square foot shop building at the department's facility in Elko near the Nevada Youth Training Center. This project is a continuation of 19 P08. That was the advanced planning for this project, which did have some design work deferred pursuant to Senate Bill 1 of the 31st special session. This new building would provide for a facility that could house larger equipment, the need to outsource such work. And this is equipment that's used by the department's Division of Forestry, and it's used across northern Nevada for the division's firefighting efforts. So, Madam Chair, for consideration for a motion, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21C01 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any discussion? Questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve CIP Project 21C01 as reflected in the closing document.
Second, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Motion from Assemblywoman Carlton, second from Assemblywoman Hodeggy. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Leiser. You may continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project is Project 21C02. This is a recommendation for a Southern Nevada Fleet Services Maintenance Building at the Grant Sawyer site. This project in the governor's budget was to recommend $9.3 million in agency funds to construct a new 6,150 square foot fleet support facility on the grounds of the Grant Sawyer office building in Las Vegas. This construction project is a continuation of the planning project approved by the 2017 legislature. It was 17 P04. Staff would note that a similar project was recommended by the governor during the 2019 session. However, the project was withdrawn by the governor due to insufficient agency funding for the project. This new facility would primarily focus on supporting vehicle maintenance and include vehicle charging stations to expand the capacity of to electrify the state's fleet. The subcommittee members may recall the area of discussion for this particular project. Following the governor's release of the recommended budget, additional information was provided by the agency that clarified the funding for this project would actually be to issue bonds, with debt service being paid out of the Fleet Services operating budget. However, the Department of Administration has confirmed that the executive budget does not include funding or have sufficient funding in the Fleet Services budget in the 21-23 biennium to support the debt service costs to pay back those bonds. And that the Fleet Services budget would not actually account for those debt service costs until the 23-25 biennium. And so, therefore, the recommendation would be to issue debt in which the Fleet Services budget cannot afford to begin paying back until it's accounted for in the 23-25 biennium budget. So, Madam Chair, given that the governor's recommendation is to fund this project through the issuance of general obligation bonds with debt service to be paid from the agency's budget, that the governor's recommended budget does not account for the necessary debt service payment obligations in the 21-23 biennium, and would rather depend upon approval by the 2023 legislature to budget for and approve funding in the 23-25 biennium to repay the debt, fiscal staff would recommend that CIP Project 21-CO2 not be approved, and that the subcommittee direct the Department of Administration, if it chooses to request the project as part of the 23 CIP, and that in doing so, the Fleet Services budget request include revenue and expenditure authority to support the project costs or debt service payments based on the recommended funding of the project at that time. So, Madam Chair, the consideration for the motion would be, does the subcommittee wish to recommend that the CIP Project 21-CO2 not be approved due to a lack of funding to support debt service payments in the 21-23 biennium, and direct the Department of Administration, if it chooses to request the project as part of the 2023 Capital Improvement Program, and that in doing so, the Fleet Services budget request include revenue and expenditure authority to support the project costs in the 2023-25 biennium.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if we push this to the 2023, are we still looking at a contingency on the agency having the funding available to repay the bonds? Or is that what we're looking at, is in the hopes that they'll now have the money to repay the bonds in the future?
For the record, Brody Leiser, Fiscal Analysis Division. During the budget hearing and in information provided to fiscal staff, the Department of Administration has indicated that the Fleet Services budget has some existing debt service that will be retired and here over the upcoming biennium, and that it would be able to support the debt service next biennium. So with if the subcommittee approved or did not approve this project at this time, there would be no bonds issued for the project, and the Department of Administration and or the governor could come forward to the 2023 legislature and recommend funding for this project again at that time, and demonstrate at that time that the budget has sufficient revenue and authority to support the project costs.
Thank you very much. Additional questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, I would accept a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And under comment, I don't think it has anything to do with the actual project. I would look forward to seeing this project come through. I believe it's needed. It's just a matter of how much the bill is going to be and when can we afford to pay the bill. So with that, I would move that CIP Project 21CO2 not be approved due to the lack of funding to support the debt service payments in the 2021-2023 biennium, and direct the Department of Administration, if it chooses to request the project as part of the 2023 CIP, and that in doing so, the Fleet Services budget request include revenue and expenditure authority to support the project cost in the 23-25 biennium.
Second, Madam Chair?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the comments, Assemblywoman Carlton, and your motion, and a second by Assemblywoman Hardigy. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project is 21CO3. This is the Washoe County Training Center addition for the Nevada Army National Guard. As originally submitted, this was a $44.6 million project consisting of $25.3 million in state general obligation bonds and $19.3 million in federal funds to design and construct a 55,000 square foot addition to the Washoe County Training Center building at the Harry Reid Training Center instead. The existing Washoe County Training Center does not currently comply with National Guard requirements regarding facility allowances, and the current facilities lack adequate training areas, administrative space, supply room space, arms vault, support space, vehicle parking, and storage space that's critical to the Guard's mission. The Office of the Military had indicated that the existing facility is currently being used at 200% capacity compared to its design, and that its units and soldiers are hindered in their ability to maintain personnel and equipment readiness. There was discussion during the hearing about the timeline with this particular project, as construction would begin in September of 2023. And during the hearing, that the information provided by the State Public Works Division, State Public Works Division had indicated that in order to receive the federal funding by September 2023, that the design work for this project must be completed and that the project must be bid and in an awardable state in order to receive the federal funding award. So this was the project that we discussed a little bit earlier in regards to having received a budget amendment to account for the necessary planning efforts that would be required for the Division of Public Works to complete in order for the Office of the Military to be able to secure that grant funding for the construction efforts. And so the Governor's Finance Office did submit a budget amendment on April 28th that requested authority for this project be increased by approximately $1.5 million. And this is reflected in your closing sheet under the revised columns. And that the amendment and the scope increase was for the purpose of the necessary planning efforts in advance of construction. And so, Madam Chair, the motion or for consideration by the subcommittee would be, does the subcommittee wish to approve the CIP project 21CO3 as reflected on the closing document, which is inclusive of the amendment that I just discussed?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Assemblywoman Carlton?
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move the approval of CIP 21CO3, the Washoe County Training Center addition as reflected in the closing document.
Thank you very much. Motion by Assemblywoman Carlton, second by Assemblywoman Hodeggy. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project is 21CO4 for the Department of Wildlife, and this is the Cave Creek Dam rehabilitation. The governor recommends $9.5 million to support this project, to complete design and construct improvements at the Cave Creek Dam at Cave Lake State Park. The Division of Water Resources of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources has classified the dam as a high hazard, as it does not meet current dam safety standards or Nevada codes. If the structural issues are not addressed, the dam could be decommissioned or potentially fail, which may result in the loss of the area as a recreational destination. The committee members may recall currently at the dam, it's actually being, I believe there's a pump going and or emergency siphon to keep the water levels low at this particular lake as a result of the concerns with the dam currently. As I had noted as we were going through the overview, one thing that I would just clarify here is, and this also is reflected in your closing document, that we have received subsequent information through the Department of Administration and working with the Department of Wildlife, and that this funding would be recommended, the funding recommended to support the project would consist of $2.6 million in general obligation bonds, $2.3 million in grant funds, $3 million in AB 84 bonds, and $1.6 million in sportsman's revenue. And as indicated, those amounts are identified in the remarks section of your closing sheet. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21CO4 as reflected on the closing document?
Questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve CIP Project 21CO4 as reflected in the closing document.
Second, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And I have a motion from Assemblywoman Carlton, a second from Assemblywoman Hodeggy. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you very much. We'll move forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project for consideration is 21CO5. This is the Engineering Academic and Research Building at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. The governor recommends $73.7 million, consisting of $36.8 million in state funds and $36.8 million in university funds, to construct a new 52,000 square foot College of Engineering academic and research building at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. The building would include lab and support facilities and spaces for teaching, student projects and collaboration, and for faculty and graduate students. The project does recommend $5.8 million for furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and the State Public Works Division has indicated that would cover 100% of the facility needs for this purpose. If approved, it's anticipated that the building would be ready for occupancy in June of 2023. Just very briefly, the subcommittee members may recall that there was funding approved in the 2019 legislative session to support a portion. It was going to support a portion of the needed costs to fund this building. However, that the funds approved in the 2019 session and that particular project was canceled as part of the budget reductions approved during the 31st special session of the legislature. And so this project was recommended by the governor to come back and fully fund the building for the university. I would note that in testimony provided during the hearing, the university did confirm that Its portion of the funding would be supported through the issuance of bonds by the university, and the debt service for those bonds would be paid back through a combination of the capital improvement fees that are charged to students as part of their registration fees, as well as donor funds that became available to support debt service. The College of Engineering at UNLV is experienced program and enrollment growth, over the past 10 plus years. And in order to meet its program demands as well as workforce needs, space expansion is needed to educate more students and meet research needs. The university also indicates that the College of Engineering has contributed to the university's ability to achieve its R1 very high research activity institution classification by Carnegie, and that the college efforts are necessary to help the university maintain this classification. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21C05 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Assemblyman Levitt.
Apologize for all the questions. I'm a newbie, and that's that's how it goes. Mr. Leiser, I made that technical adjustment. Is this so? It looks like it's an even split. Is this a required match by the university, or is it just they had to make up the difference in some way, and we were only going to dedicate so much funds towards this project?
For the record, Brody Leiser, Assemblyman Levitt, I apologize that I can't give you the exact biennium, but over the last 2 or 3 biennium, the policy of the legislature and policy of the money committees for university projects has been to have a 50-50 split for these projects. And so it's the 50-50 split that's recommended here is consistent with recent projects approved by this body for the universities.
Thank you. That clarified it. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions?
No additional questions, Madam Chair, just a quick comment. We can vote on this one, and then I think I can go home, because we will have finally gotten this thing done.
Amen.
So, the folks who have worked on this have done a fantastic job of educating every single person in this building about the importance of the CIP project. I just think it's good for us to have it on the record because of some of the confusion and difficulties that we had with the medical school building, to make sure we're absolutely clear on the engineering building. This will be a public works project, and that the way the NRS reads is that the state dollars are the last dollars in. So the first half of the dollars will come from the other funding sources, and I truly hope the donors step up as much as possible, so this burden doesn't lie on the students as much, since they've wanted this building for so long, and that the second half of the funding, the state is the last half in. So if we could confirm that, please.
For the record, Brody Leiser, confirmed.
And I appreciate that, Assemblywoman Carlton, you're spot on, and this is a much-needed building, and we have a really great engineering program at UNLV that we should embrace. So with that, no more questions. I will take a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would very happily move that 21 CO5 Engineering and Academic and Research Building be approved as reflected in the closing documents.
And I will very happily ditto.
And I will very happily accept the motion from Assemblywoman Carlton and a second from Assemblywoman Hadagi. And no discussion on the motion. Oh, there's our Speaker Frierson.
I just want to join in on the happiness. I'm happy
Oh,
we're moving this.
yay! I'm glad you're being happy there. Thank you very much, sir. And with that, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project for consideration is 21 CO6. This is the Hobart Reservoir Dam rehabilitation for the Marlette Lake water system. Governor recommends $13.9 million, consisting of $10 million in federal funds and $3.9 million in state general obligation bonds to complete design and construct structural and functional upgrades at the Hobart Reservoir Dam. This would include seismic upgrades, spillway upgrades, access bridge construction, and replacement of discharge piping and outlet valves. I would just note that the State Public Works Division did indicate that they are anticipating a status update in June of 2021 on the federal approval for the grant funding, and that in June of 2021 that anticipate notification that the project would be considered for further review at that time. There was some discussion during the subcommittee hearing on this project in regards to the recommended funding this project. The state's portion was state general obligation bonds, and whether or not the Marlette Lake water system customers, currently Carson City and Story County, had available funding to also contribute towards this project. It was confirmed that Carson City and Story County did not currently have ability to support a portion of the costs for this particular project. And it was further discussed and provided during testimony that while the Marlette Lake water system provides water to those two local entities, that the water system as a whole benefits a larger scope of population, including and other state agencies such as the Department of Wildlife and State Parks, that the water system as a whole is owned by the state and is an asset of the state, and therefore the responsibility of the state to make sure that the infrastructure is sound. And furthermore, that the legislature has approved projects in the past for the Marlette Lake water system funded through the issuance of state general obligation bonds. And so, Madam Chair, with that, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP project 21 CO6 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve CIP Project 21C06 as reflected in the closing document.
Second?
Thank you very much. Motion from Assemblywoman Carlton and second from Assemblywoman Hodegee. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Okay. I know, it was a little bit of hesitation there. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you, class. Sounds like everybody's awake now. I appreciate that. Anyone opposed? Okay, we're moving on. Thank you, Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to start to move a little bit quicker here through some of these projects. The next project is 21 CO7. This is to construct an organizational parking area at the Washoe County Armory. Governor recommends $1.4 million, consisting of $1 million in federal funds, $432,627 in state general obligation bonds to construct a gravel top parking area with fencing for organizational vehicle parking at the Washoe County Armory instead. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21 CO7 as reflected in the closing document?
Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Move to approve as reflected in the closing document.
Second.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton and Assemblywoman Hodegee. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project is 21C08. This is a purchase of a Navy Operational Support Center. The governor recommends $4.5 million, consisting of $3.8 million in state general obligation bonds, $686,035 in federal funds to purchase the Navy Operational Support Center instead, that is currently owned by the University of Nevada, Reno. The Office of the Military indicates that this site would be utilized by the STED Training Center unit to support training and mobilization support to the Nevada Army National Guard Northern units. And the Office of the Military further indicated that the purchase of the property would allow them to address the 2018 National Defense Strategy by providing a site to develop the capability of mobilizing units in support of state and federal missions, independent of external resources and training needs. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21C08 as reflected in the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Move for approval.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. And any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next project is 21C09. This is for comfort station replacement at the Valley of Fire State Park. Governor recommends total funding of $816,297, consisting of $436,579 in state general obligation bonds and $379,718 in federal funds to replace 6 restroom stations throughout the Valley of Fire State Park. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21C09 as reflected in the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Move for approval, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. And with that, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project is 21C10. This is for an aircraft storage hangar and site work at the Harry Reid Training Center. Governor recommends $6.5 million, consisting of $3.7 million in federal funds and $2.8 million in state general obligation bonds to complete design and construct a 16,355 square foot storage hangar for the Army Aviation Support Facility at the Harry Reid Training Center instead. The Nevada Army National Guard currently has 12 aircraft, but only currently has hangar space for 6 of the aircraft. And this would allow for hangar space for all of its existing aircraft at the facility. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21C10 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Move for approval, Madam Chair.
Thank you to Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. And any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Leiser, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project is 21C11. This is a cemetery expansion supplemental funding for the Southern Nevada Veterans Memorial Cemetery. The governor recommends $4.1 million, consisting of $3.5 million in federal funds, $607,271 in state general obligation bonds to support the continuation and expansion of the CIP Project 19C03, which was the cemetery expansion for the Southern Nevada Veterans Memorial Cemetery. The members may recall there was some discussion. The previously approved CIP Project 19C03 is dependent upon the 2021 legislature approving this project, as the projects collectively would fulfill the federal VA requirement to build a 10-year expansion at the Southern Nevada Veterans Memorial Cemetery, and that specifically the 2021 project for consideration today would provide the necessary 10% match for both projects to be completed. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21C11 as reflected in the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions? I'll accept a motion.
I would move for approval, Madam Chair.
Second, Madam Chair.
Thank you to Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project is 21C12. This is for a welding lab addition and renovation at the Great Basin College in Elko. And the governor recommends $6.3 million, consisting of $5.7 million in state general obligation bonds and $600,000 in funds from the college to complete design development through construction for a 4,500 square foot welding lab at the Great Basin College campus in Elko. The project, I apologize. The $600,000 provided by the college for this project, the Great Basin College indicated that the student-generated capital improvement fee revenues would be the funding source, and that the entire amount is currently available to support this project. This would be a continuation of the 19P70 project approved by the 2019 legislature. And I would just note that there was some discussion in the hearing for this project back on February 11th that concerned the project's coordination and the ability to not disrupt the program or students, given that the welding program at the college is a high demand program. And the testimony during that hearing indicated to limit the impacts to the program and students, that the approach would be to first build the new addition to have welding stations available. And once that is complete, then work would be done to renovate the existing facility as to limit and not disrupt the students in the program area. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21C12 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll take a motion.
Move for approval, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. And any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The last construction project is 21C13. This is for the renovation of the Marlette Lecture Hall at Western Nevada College here in Carson City. The governor recommends $1.5 million of general obligation bonds to complete design development through construction for the renovation of the 1,950 square foot Marlette Lecture Hall at Western Nevada College. The renovation would reconfigure the hall from a 120-seat tiered auditorium to a collaborative teaching classroom with 50 to 60 seats in a less tiered arrangement, and that the classroom would be planned to be interactive and allow students to present projects on large video screens and facilitate virtual distance learning and collaboration. This would be a continuation of Project 19P71 that had its scope reduced as part of the 31st special session. And therefore, the 21 project would complete the planning design efforts through construction. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21C13 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
A move for approval, Madam Chair.
Second.
Thank you very much from Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. And any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As previously indicated, the closing document before you has a number of maintenance projects that are shaded in gray. And based on the subcommittee's review of these projects during previous hearings and follow-up information provided to staff, there are no major issues identified with this subset of projects. So unless members would like to pull any of the shaded projects for discussion, fiscal staff would recommend that a single motion be taken for consideration on these projects. So Madam Chair, the motion for consideration would be, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP projects 21M01, 21M03 through 21M05, 21M07 through 21M13, 21M15 through 21M43, 21M45 through 21M47, and CIP projects 21M50 through 21M58 as reflected on the closing document.
Thank you very much. Seeing no questions, I'll accept a motion.
Madam Chair, I would move as staff indicated on the maintenance projects.
Thank you very much from Assemblywoman Carlton and Haddocky. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. The motion is accepted as listed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the first maintenance project that is identified to be discussed is project 21M02. We mentioned this project specifically in the overview before we began the individual projects. This is, the governor recommends, as initially submitted, had recommended $28.2 million in state general obligation bonds to support a single consolidated CIP maintenance project for the Department of Health and Human Services, which is a new approach recommended by the governor for this agency in the 2021 CIP. The estimated cost is based on 19 individually identified projects for various Department of Health and Human Services facilities throughout the state that previously would have been recommended as individual projects and separate maintenance projects within the CIP. The 19 individual projects comprising the $28.2 million as originally recommended are identified as Priority 1 projects by the State Public Works Division. These are typically projects that the division has identified to be addressed within the next 2 years. In addition, in the CIP book and cost estimate sheet for this particular project, the State Public Works Division has identified 16 additional projects that are identified as Priority 2 projects that could be funded if the Priority 1 projects result in savings after completion. So fiscal staff has not identified any issues with the individual projects recommended by the governor. However, as discussed during the budget hearing, this consolidated approach would represent a budget policy change for the maintenance projects for this agency. So the recommendation to consolidate the projects as indicated would be a new approach. And in testimony, the Division of State Public Works Division had indicated this would be a similar approach to this, what is done and currently approved with the statewide programs. There were several benefits identified by the State Public Works Division, and they indicated two primary benefits of the consolidated project approach, and that would be the ability to address emergencies or contingencies as they arise, and the potential for the division to begin work immediately to fund priority 2 projects with any savings that were identified from priority 1 projects. During the budget hearing, there was some discussion among the subcommittee, and the State Public Works Division did testify to and has provided information that is reflected in your closing document that through this consolidated approach, the construction contingency that was otherwise budgeted at 15% could be reduced to 10%. As a result of that adjustment, it would reduce the overall project cost by $1 million, as reflected in your closing sheets. Fiscal staff would just note that it has been the policy of the legislature to limit the use of funds in any given biennium to individual projects approved within the CIP, with limited exceptions. The CIP legislation has historically included language that allows for some flexibility with approval of the IFC, permitting the State Public Works Division to request approval to move funding from one project to another within the biennium's approved CIP and within the same agency. This project, as recommended, would remove that requirement and oversight from the IFC and provide the flexibility for the State Public Works Division to facilitate such transfers between and among all Department of Health and Human Services deferred maintenance projects. Additionally, under Chapter NRS 341-145, that requires approval of the IFC before any change in scope of approved project if that change results in an increase or decrease of costs or total square footage by 10% compared to the legislatively approved project. By consolidating the 19 individual projects under the umbrella of this single project, the State Public Works Division may not be required to bring forward such requests to the IFC for changes in scope or costs of the individual projects that would otherwise be required if these were approved as individual projects. If the subcommittee wishes to recommend approval of the consolidated approach, it may wish to recommend that the agency report to the Interim Finance Committee when funding approved for any of the 19 Priority 1 projects was expended on either Priority 2 or emergency projects. So, Madam Chair, while fiscal staff has not identified any issues with the individual projects, given the recommended change in policy, the subcommittee may wish to consider the following options. Approving CIP Project 21M02 as recommended by the governor with an adjustment to reduce the budgeted construction contingency by $1 million with total funding of $27.1 million and as reflected on your closing sheet. This would provide funding for the State Public Works Division to complete all 19 Priority 1 projects identified in the project cost estimate and authorize the State Public Works Division to utilize savings from actual costs of any or all 19 Priority 1 projects to be used to fund one or more of the Priority 2 projects identified on the project cost estimate sheet. If this option is recommended, the subcommittee may wish to recommend that the agency report to the Interim Finance Committee on a quarterly basis, summarizing the status of approved projects in the consolidated approach, identification of any savings realized by the project, and identification when savings from Priority 1 projects was expended on either Priority 2 projects or emergency projects through the issuance of a letter of intent. Alternatively, the subcommittee may wish to consider approving all 19 Priority 1 projects identified in the CIP 21M02 as individual projects in the CIP legislation, consistent with prior policy of the money committees in approving maintenance projects for the Department of Health and Human Services, which would eliminate the $1 million in savings as the construction contingency would be restored to 15% for each individual project at a total cost of $0.2 million. So Madam Chair, my apologies for being a little redundant here, but the question before the subcommittee would be, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21 MO2 as recommended by the governor with an adjustment to reduce the budgeted construction contingency by $1 million with total funding of $27.1 million and as reflected on your closing sheet, and recommend the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to report to the interim finance committee on a quarterly basis summarizing the status of approved priority 1 projects, identification of any savings realized by project, and identification when savings from priority 1 projects was expended on either priority 2 projects or emergency repairs. Or what would be the second option, option B, would be approve all 19 priority 1 projects identified in the CIP Project 21 MO2 as individual projects consistent with prior policy of the money committees, in approving maintenance projects for the Department of Health and Human Services, which would eliminate the $1 million in savings as the construction contingency would be restored to 15% for each individual project at a total cost of $28.2 million.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leiser. Are there any questions from the committee? Not seeing any. I would accept a motion on option A, if that pleases you, Assemblywoman Carlton.
And thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to admit this was a tough sell. It's very rare that I get comfortable with the legislature giving up any of its authority, especially when it comes to the purse strings and making sure that projects do get funded. But I believe since these are maintenance projects, they're not quite as in-depth and long-term, and we need to keep these projects going. If we want to have an experiment this next interim on this one, I think the quarterly reporting will give us a very good idea on how it's going, how they're getting through the Tier 1 projects. If we do get to the 2-tier projects, if there are any emergencies, I think the communication level will be high enough that we'll be able, that this legislature during the interim will be able to evaluate whether they'd like to keep moving forward with this. So I would be comfortable with option A, so that would be my motion.
I would second, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton, for making the motion on item A, and a second by Assemblywoman Hodegee. Any discussion? Senator Kekeffer.
Yeah, we have nothing in our document that outlines options by alphabet.
Oh,
no,
I'm sorry.
letters.
Let me read it off then. I apologize. So I would move to approve CIP Project 21 MO2 as recommended by the governor with an adjustment to reduce the budgeted construction contingency by $1 million with a total funding of $27.1 million, and as reflected on your closing sheet, recommended the issuance of a letter of intent directing that the agency report to the interim finance committee on a quarterly basis summarizing the status of approved priority 1 projects, identification of any savings realized by project, and identification when savings from priority 1 projects was expended on either priority 2 projects or emergency projects.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton, for reading motion 1, I guess, or the first one. Thank you very much. And a second by Assemblywoman Hodegee. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Leiser, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project is 21 MO6. This is for deferred maintenance for the Nevada system of higher education. The governor recommends $15 million in funding to support deferred maintenance projects for the system. Just would note that historically, NSHE has received $15 million each biennium for this purpose as part of the legislatively approved CIP. As previously indicated during the overview at the beginning of this closing, the governor's recommendation to support this project includes $1 million in slot tax revenues. Would just note that based on slot tax revenue projections that are used to fund existing debt service obligations, and with the remaining authority that still exists to support a portion of the 2019 deferred maintenance project for NSHE, fiscal staff's analysis reflects that there would not be sufficient revenue to support the governor's recommendation to include $1 million of slot tax revenues over the 21-23 biennium to support this project as recommended. And therefore, the subcommittee may wish to consider replacing the $1 million in recommended slot tax revenues with general obligation bonds to fund the project in whole at the $15 million level, consistent with the level of funding that has been historically approved by the legislature to support deferred maintenance at the Nevada System of Higher Education institutions. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $15 million in state general obligation bonds to support CIP Project 21M06 and not approve the authority of $1 million in slot tax revenue that was otherwise recommended by the governor for allocation to support a portion of this project?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move as indicated to recommend approval of $15 million in state general obligation bonds to support CIP Project 21M06 and not approve the authority of the $1 million in slot tax revenue that was otherwise recommended by the governor for allocation to support a portion of this project.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton and Assemblywoman Hadagi. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, motion passes. Mr. Leisner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next two projects I would like to discuss together. These are Project 21M14, the data center facility upgrades for the enterprise IT services, and 21M44, the computer room cooling system upgrades for the state computer facility. The governor recommends $325,633 in agency funds for Project 21M14 and $2.2 million in agency funds for CIP Project 21M44. Similar to the discussion that we had with the Fleet Services Building, subsequent information that was provided by the department has clarified that these projects are not intended to be funded with agency funds, but rather that the projects would be funded through the issuance of bonds with debt service paid back from the EATS budgets. However, the executive budget does not include funding or have expenditure authority in the EATS budget in the 2021 to 23 biennium to support debt service costs for these projects. And that in presenting these projects during the hearing and in information provided, that the intent would be that the necessary revenues and expenditure authority to support the debt service would be built into the 23-25 biennium. Therefore, Madam Chair, given that the governor's recommendation is to fund these two projects through the issuance of general obligation bonds with debt service to be paid from the agency's budget, that the governor's recommended budget does not account for the necessary debt service payment obligations and would rather depend upon approval of the 2023 legislature to budget for and approve funding in the 2023 to 25 biennium to repay the debt, fiscal staff would recommend that CIP projects 21M14 and 21M44 not be approved, and that the subcommittee direct the Department of Administration, if it chooses to request the projects as part of the 2023 CIP and that in doing so, the EATS budget request include revenue and expenditure authority to support the project costs or debt service payments based on the recommended funding of the project at that time. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to recommend that CIP projects 21M14 and 21M44 not be approved due to a lack of funding to support debt service payments in the 21 to 23 biennium, and direct the Department of Administration, if it chooses to request the project as part of the 2023 CIP, and that in doing so, the Enterprise Information Technology Services budget request include revenue and expenditure authority to support the project costs in the 2023 to 25 biennium.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that CIP projects 21M14 and 21M44 not be approved due to the lack of funding to support the debt service payments in the 21-23 biennium, and direct the Department of Administration, if it chooses to request the projects as part of the 23 CIP, and that in doing so, that the Enterprise Information Technology System budget request include revenue and expenditure authority to support the project cost or debt service payments based on the recommended funding of the project at that time.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton and Assemblywoman Hadagi. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project for discussion is 21M49, the purchasing warehouse renovation. The governor recommends $969,423 in agency funds to renovate the purchasing warehouse in Las Vegas with a replacement roof and addition of a fire alarm and sprinkler system. Staff would note that the executive budget did not include funding in the purchasing budget in the upcoming biennium to support costs for this project. However, based on information provided from the Department of Administration and looking at the anticipated projecting ending balance in this budget for fiscal year 2021, it does appear that the agency's budget could support 100% of the project's costs in the 2021 to 23 biennium. I would just note for the committee that in closing the purchasing division's budget, the General Government Subcommittee did provide fiscal staff with the authority to make an adjustment to that budget to reflect the project costs if this CIP project is approved. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21M49 funded with reserved assessment and fee revenues in the purchasing budget as reflected in the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve project 21M49 funded with reserve assessment and fee revenues in the purchasing budget as reflected in the closing document.
Thank you very much from Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Leiser. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lastly, we have two maintenance projects that, as previously noted, were submitted through a budget amendment on April 28th. And given that the subcommittee did not previously hear these two projects, these projects were not included in the consolidated motion. But a single motion could be taken for these two projects. So 21M59, this is a central plant replacement for the Nevada State Museum. This would be funded with $3.1 million of state general obligation bonds. The additional, as I mentioned, the additional funding to support this project was discussed under the funding summary, and the project would provide for the renovation of the central plant at the Nevada State Museum, Las Vegas, to replace chilled water equipment, cooling towers, boilers, pumps, temperature controls, and other associated equipment. The second project, 21M60, is to replace the cell doors and locks at Northern Nevada Correctional Center. And this project would replace the cell doors, sally port, exterior doors, door locks, wing gate operators, door controls, and door control wiring in housing units 4, 5, and 6 at the institution. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP projects 21M59 and 21M60 added to the governor's recommended CIP through a budget amendment received on April 28th, 2021, and as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
So moved, Madam Chair, as staff indicated.
Thank you very much. And Senator Ratty, could I have a second? Second. Thank you very much. And with that, any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next group of projects are under the Economic Development section that begins on page 17 of your closing document. These are, the subcommittee may recall that the projects are described as economic development projects. A similar classification was approved by the 2011 legislature for projects, but has not been recommended since that time. The governor's recommendation would include $6.2 million, which includes $2.3 million in state funding for 7 of these E projects. And based on information presented by the division, these are projects that have other sources of funding available for project costs and require some sort of investment or match by the state. These are projects that would otherwise not be recommended except for the non-state funding that they would bring to the state, and therefore bring economic development to the state by leveraging CIP funding to increase non-state funding. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, based on the subcommittee's review of these projects during previous hearings and follow-up information provided to staff, there are no major issues identified with this group of projects. Unless members would like to pull any of the economic development projects for discussion, fiscal staff would recommend a single motion be taken for consideration on these projects. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP projects 21E01 through 21E02 as reflected on the closing document?
E0.
Sorry, let me state that again. That's number 2. Does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP projects 21E01 through 21E07 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much, Mr. Leiser. And with that, any questions from committee? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve CIP projects 21E01 through 21E07 as reflected on the closing document.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton and Hattigi. And with that, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, motion passes. I'm sorry, Senator Keffer, nay. Thank you very much. Motion passes. And with that, Mr. Leiser, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next grouping of projects on page 18 of your closing packet, and this would include the planning projects. You'll notice there are 2 projects highlighted in gray. Again, based on the subcommittee's review of these projects during previous hearings, follow-up information provided to staff. There are no issues identified with these 2 projects. And unless members would like to discuss these projects, fiscal staff would recommend a motion be taken for consideration on these projects. Does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP projects P02 and 21P04 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Not seeing any, I'll accept the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve CIP projects 21P02 and 21P04 as reflected in our closing documents.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton and Assemblywoman Hadegay. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now I will begin to go through the planning projects, the other planning projects, the first being 21P01. The governor recommends $4.9 million in state general obligation bonds to complete the advanced planning of a complete renovation of the Grant Sawyer Building in Las Vegas. The project would replace the interior partitions, carpets, wall coverings, interior lighting, HVAC, life safety systems, plumbing, sewer modifications, and elevator renovations. The future construction costs would be estimated at $93 million for this project. Would note that the project was previously approved by the 2019 legislature. However, as part of the reductions during the 31st special session, that project was reduced in scope, and therefore this recommendation from the governor would fund those efforts that were otherwise previously approved by the legislature. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP project 21P01 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Not seeing any, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve projects 21P01 as reflected in our closing documents.
Second?
Thank you very much from Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadegay. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next project is 21P03. This is for advanced planning for remodel and addition at the Southern Nevada Veterans Home. The governor recommends $4.2 million, consisting of $2.6 million in federal funds and $1.6 million in state general obligation bonds to complete programming and design through construction documents for the renovation of and addition to the Southern Nevada State Veterans Home in Boulder City. The future construction project would contemplate renovation work of 82,000 square feet of existing space, including residents' bedrooms, common areas, central dining, the nurses' station, physical therapy spaces, staff work areas, the chapel, culinary, and other support spaces. In addition, the project would add 14,400 square feet of new space for resident rooms. The project would convert double occupancy rooms to single occupancy rooms, which the agency testified to, during the hearing was a requirement of the federal grant funding. If approved, the future construction and work would result in the facility going from a 180-bed capacity to 120 beds at the facility. And I would just note there was some discussion during the hearing and in regards to the current occupancy of the home itself. And I would just note that information was provided and presented when the Veteran Services budgets were closed. And at that time, which I believe was a week or a week and a half ago, the current census at the Southern Nevada Vets Home was 132 residents with a waiting list of 32 that were expecting to be 6 of those to be admitted at the end of April, 9 to be admitted in May, and 17 applications that were being worked on at the time. And during that hearing, it was also indicated that both the Southern Nevada Vets Home and the Northern Nevada Vets Home are currently COVID-free. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP project 21P03 as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Not seeing any, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve Project 21 P03 as reflected in our closing documents.
Thank you very much from Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. With that, is there any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next project's 21P05. This is for advanced planning or general instruction building at the Florida Edsel Training Center. Governor recommends $5.4 million, consisting of $4 million in federal funds and $1.4 million in state general obligation bonds to complete design through construction documents for a general instruction building, barracks, dining facility, and supporting facilities within the Florida Edsel Training Center north of the Speedway Readiness Center. The new facility is required for the 421st Regional Training Institute to maintain its accreditation for training the National Signal Non-Commissioned Officer Corps. And according to the agency, a self-contained educational facility with barracks and a dining facility is required to provide adequate space to conduct non-commissioned officer enlisted schools, military occupational skill courses, and first sergeant courses. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21P05 as reflected in the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept the motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve CIP Project 21 P05 as reflected in our closing document.
I'll accept a second. Thank you very much from Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi. All those, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 21P06 is an advanced planning project for the Department of Motor Vehicles Silverado Ranch facility. The governor recommends highway fund appropriations of $6.3 million to complete design development through construction documents for a new full-service Department of Motor Vehicles facility, including a commercial driver's license services on Silverado Ranch Boulevard and Valley View Boulevard in Las Vegas. The building is estimated to be 67,000 square feet and would include customer service stations, classrooms, testing spaces, offices, emission stations, and waiting areas. The project justification and testimony had indicated that the Donovan CDL Express facility could not handle customer demand and that the Henderson's DMV customer service stations were inadequate to meet the agency's operational processes, equipment needs, and accessibility requirements. If a new facility was approved and constructed at the Silverado Ranch facility, the intent would be to close both the Donovan CDL Express and Henderson DMV facilities. During the budget hearing, there was discussion and testimony in regards to whether or not those two offices could be kept open if this project were approved and future construction was completed. The Department of Motor Vehicles indicated that the plan was to close the Donovan and Henderson office, and that the new office would target the customers that are currently being served by those offices, and it would be unable to keep the Donovan and Henderson offices opened while maintaining or keeping its budget within the statutory highway fund cap that's set in statute if all three of the locations were kept open. Further, in regards to those two locations, the Department of Motor Vehicles had indicated that the Donovan location was in poor. The location itself was poor, that parking was problematic, and difficult to access the facility, and that there were ADA issues, lack of workable space, security issues, and a lack of parking at the Henderson office. and that the Donovan location would need a new storefront. It lacks classroom training space and has remodeling needs. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21P06 as reflected in the closing document?
And Madam Chair, could I ask for a 1-minute recess, please?
Yes, you may. 1-minute recess.
And thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to make sure that I have the chance to check with folks. So if you're willing to take a motion at this time, my motion would be to defer this particular decision unit to full committee for further discussion.
I'll accept a second on that motion. Okay, I'll accept a motion from Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadagi to defer this unit to the full committee for discussion. And with that, is there any discussion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's some unanswered questions that I had from my colleagues that I would like to investigate a little bit further and see where we are and just go from there. There were some concerns that were raised, and I apologize. It blew right by me, and I didn't get some of those answers. So with your indulgence, taking this, giving us a little more time to work on this would be appropriate at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton, for the comments. And if we have no further discussion, I have a motion from Assemblywoman Carlton and a second from Assemblywoman Hadagi to defer this to full committee. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. We'll defer to full committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The last planning project for consideration by the subcommittee is Project 21P07. This project was one of the 3 projects that were submitted to be added to the governor's recommended CIP through the budget amendment that was previously referred to and received on April 28th. This project would provide a preliminary analysis, wastewater system modeling, and design through construction documents to upgrade the wastewater treatment system at the Lovelock Correctional Center. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP Project 21P07 added to the governor's recommended CIP through budget amendment received on April 28th, 2021, and as reflected on the closing document?
Thank you very much. Any questions on this? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve CIP Project 21P07, added to the governor's recommended CIP through a budget amendment received on April 28th of 2021 as reflected in our closing documents.
Second, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Motion from Assemblywoman Carlton and second from Assemblywoman Hadagi. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That brings us to the last grouping of projects, which is the statewide projects. You'll notice, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, you'll notice a number of projects in the statewide section of your closing document that are shaded in gray. Based on the subcommittee's review of these projects during previous hearings, follow-up information provided to staff, there are no issues identified with this subset of projects. Unless members would like to pull any of the shaded projects for discussion, fiscal staff would recommend a single motion be taken for consideration on these projects. Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve CIP projects 21S01 through 21S09 as reflected on the closing document and with authority for fiscal staff to make technical adjustments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Leiser. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll take a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve CIP projects 21S01 through 21S09 as reflected in our closing documents with the authority for fiscal staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Second.
Thank you very much to Assemblywoman Carlton and Hadeke. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Mr. Leiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I threw myself a curveball there with the technical adjustments. I'll be asking for that authority on all the projects here as we wrap up, and I was trying to avoid asking for that authority through each and every motion that you've taken today. So the next project that's on.
Bless you, Mr. Leiser.
I was going to interrupt him as well, Assemblywoman. Mr. Leiser, you owe us no more apologies. Please move on.
So the last project for consideration today is funding for the State Infrastructure Bank. And this is recommended in CIP Project 21S11. The subcommittee has had a thorough discussion on this project, or on funding to launch the bank. This was heard on March 11th. There was a work session held on April 13th. The governor recommends $75 million in general obligation bonds to fund and launch the Nevada State Infrastructure Bank that's established pursuant to NRS 408.55069. Just as a brief reminder, the bank was established through the passage of Assembly Bill 399 by the 2017 legislature for the purpose of providing loans and other financial assistance to various units of state and local government for the development, construction, improvement, operation, and ownership of certain transportation facilities and utility infrastructure. In addition, the bank could be used as a match to any federal funding that may become available or be received as part of a federal infrastructure bank. Would note that launching the bank is a priority of the governor as communicated during his State of the State that was delivered on January 19th, 2021, and is recommended to address the needed infrastructure upgrades throughout the state and as a job-creating measure for Nevadans by utilizing the state's general obligation debt affordability. I would note that following the March 11th hearing, the Department of Administration had provided a list of 162 potential projects that was provided to them by the governor's office, and that have been identified for local governments as shovel-ready projects. Would just note that the bank is to be administered by a board of directors that would consist of the Nevada Department of Transportation Director, the State Treasurer, the Director of the Department of Business and Industry, the Executive Director of the Office of Economic Development, and 2 members of the public appointed by the governor. There was some discussion during the hearing and then during the work session about the operational costs associated with the state infrastructure bank and the timing challenges to fund the bank through general obligation bonds to ensure that the executive director could be brought on board and that the board of directors could get processes in place to establish an application process and approve the application process. And there were options presented during the work session to address those concerns and timing concerns with the funding recommendation. As I mentioned in closing the bond interest and redemption account, the governor's finance office did submit a budget amendment on April 22nd that recommends supporting the position, salary, and related costs for the executive director as well as an administrative assistant position and operating expenditures to support the staff and board, and that a budget amendment would be established, the budget amendment would establish a new Nevada Department of Transportation budget titled the Statewide Infrastructure Bank, and those costs would be funded through unobligated reserved interest earnings from the bond interest and redemption account. So that, as I mentioned, that was discussed in the bond interest and redemption closing. The budget amendment itself will be presented to the full money committees when the Nevada Department of Transportation budgets are brought forward to the Senate Committee on Finance and Assembly Committee on Ways and Means. Madam Chair, there was also discussion during the work session and during the budget hearing about a BDR request that was submitted by the governor's office relating to the state infrastructure bank, and would note that that bill has been introduced. It's Senate Bill 430, has been referred to the Senate Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, and the provisions of the bill are consistent with the testimony and information that was previously provided by the governor's office during the testimony in the work session and in the budget hearing. The bill would revise the eligibility provisions to add Indian reservations, colonies, and private entities created for charitable or educational purposes to be eligible to receive loans and financial assistance from the bank. The bill would expand the type of eligible facilities that could be financed through the bank to include water and wastewater, renewable energy, recycling and sustainability, digital and social infrastructure, and other infrastructure needs related to economic development. The bill would remove the requirement for the board to establish specific accounts and rather authorize the establishment of accounts, and that accounting for the fund is performed in accordance with applicable laws and regulations. The bill provides clarifying language that the bank shall operate under the direction of the board. The bill also adds the director of the Office of Energy to the board of directors and would expand the list of agencies that may provide technical support and assistance to the bank to include the Department of Business and Industry, the Office of Economic Development, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Office of the State Treasurer, and the Office of Energy. Madam Chair, given that the State Public Works Division of the Department of Administration would not have oversight or management responsibilities associated with the State Infrastructure Bank, fiscal staff would recommend that if the subcommittee recommends approval of the funding recommended by the governor or funding at a different level other than recommended, that the CIP project number reference be removed when the CIP legislation is drafted, and to ensure that it is clear that the bank is not to be administered by the State Public Works Division under the provisions of Chapter 341 of NRS. So, Madam Chair, does the subcommittee wish to approve $75 million in state general obligation bonds to fund the launch of the State Infrastructure Bank established pursuant to NRS 408.55069?
Thank you very much. Any questions on this item? Senator Kekeffer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am certainly a supporter of the infrastructure bank, but I do not support the idea of using general obligation bonds to fund it at this point. And especially with some of the changes that are being allowed for within the proposed legislation, using state general obligation debt for private and nonprofit purposes outside of our state infrastructure is just a bit too far for me. I would rather we seed this with some of our cash on hand, our unallocated ending fund balance, or some other means, and so I won't be supporting this piece of the CIP. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, I will accept a motion.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I too understand Senator Kekeffer's concerns, but my level of comfort is knowing that there's a lot of off-ramps on this thing before it actually gets where it's going, and this is just a subcommittee closing. We've had a lot of conversation about this. It is a Senate bill. I look forward to seeing what it looks like when it comes out of the north end of the building and heads to the south end. And so I'm comfortable with moving forward just because I want to see all pieces of the puzzle keep moving as we get through this. Not giving any particular commitment, just willing to stay open-minded about where we actually are. I understand the senator's concerns, but we've also had very heart-wrenching meetings in Health and Human Services. So it's going to be a balancing act with where cash needs to go this session and where bonding needs to be. So with that, Madam Chair, I would move to approve $75 million in state general obligation bonds to fund the launch of the State Infrastructure Bank established pursuant to NRS 408.55069.
Thank you very much.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Carlton, a second from Assemblywoman Hadagi. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Chair Dondella-Loop. I too am going to oppose this, and kind of the broader theme of economic development and what falls into the definition of economic development, because we had some projects earlier that look like maintenance projects that are under economic development, and now we have potentially a bill that's very broad as far as what it considers economic development for this infrastructure bank. So I'm going to be a no on this, and I do look forward to looking at the legislation and considering, really how do we grow our economy and diversify our economy, what types of projects fit into that type of mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assemblywoman Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And same here. I have the same concerns that Senator Kekeffer does as far as the obligation bond supporting fund positions. And so I'll be no, and I look forward to the legislation, and maybe I can change my mind later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Assemblyman Levitt, are you nodding your head? Are you saying yes? Are you wanting to talk?
For briefness, I'll just ditto my colleagues.
Thank you very much. All right, seeing no more discussion, we have a motion on the table. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Would those who are opposed please raise your hand so the secretary can get an accurate count? Thank you very much. And with that, the motion passes. Mr. Leiser?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Finally, fiscal staff would request authority to make technical adjustments as necessary to the CIP projects and to the State Infrastructure Bank that have been recommended for approval by the subcommittee.
Thank you very much. I would ask if anybody has any questions. Seeing none, I would accept a motion.
And Madam Chair, I would move technical adjustments as necessary. I'm not sure what staff would do without their technical adjustments, so.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Carlton and Assemblywoman Hadagi. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes. Thank you very much. And with that, I would like, before we go to public comment, which is the last thing on our agenda, I would like to thank our staff profusely, as well as the secretaries and sergeant-at-arms who hang in there with us each day. We appreciate all your time and expertise. With that, oh, yes, Assemblywoman?
And thank you, Madam Chair, and I need to apologize to the subcommittee on both sides of the building. We had some chair notes in front of us, so when we were going A and B, it's not that the documents weren't available. They were merely provided to staff, to us, just to make sure that we got this thing done right the first time around, so we wouldn't have to come back and do it again, because we know CIPs are very complicated, and it's one of my favorite bills of the session, because I always look at it as the jobs bill. So it's not that we didn't mean to give documents to folks, these were just merely meant to make sure that those of us working the motions had everything in line the way we needed it to be. So I apologize for any confusion that may have brought up during the meeting.
Thank you very much, Assemblyman Carlton. I had that on a list to say as well, so I appreciate you saying that, so ditto. With that, we will go to public comment broadcasting when you're ready. Just a reminder that we will start here in the room, and we have one person for public comment. Please go ahead when you're ready. You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association. Since the introduction of SB 543 2 years ago, NSEA has expressed numerous policy concerns with the new funding plan, including the fact that it contained no new revenue. In lieu of new funding, SB 543 created the Commission on School Funding, charged with recommending funding targets and identifying revenues to fully fund the associated costs. On April 23rd, the Commission published their preliminary recommendations. While NSEA opposed SB 543, we largely agree with the Commission's funding targets. The Commission proposed reaching adequate funding by increasing education investment by $2 billion over the next 10 years. That's $400 million each biennium, starting this session. In their revenue plan, the Funding Commission focused on property tax and expanding the base of sales tax. NSEA has been supportive of numerous proposals to address Nevada's property tax, including SJR 14 in 2017. However, this session, even simple property tax reforms like SB 10 and SB 64 failed to clear the first bill deadline in the Senate. NSEA has consistently raised concerns related to SB 543 since the Bill's committee hearing. During the interim, NSEA participated in every meeting of the Commission on School Funding. We called attention to the chronic underfunding of public education, including organizing 4 major rallies here in Carson City in the last 2 years. 2 of these rallies happening during a global pandemic. And NSEA supported every serious revenue proposal discussed at the legislature for as long as we can remember, leading on several major revenue campaigns, including IP1. Meanwhile, SB 543 was developed behind closed doors, wasn't introduced till the 99th day of the session, had but a single public hearing with the bill passing minutes before Sani Dye. This bill created the Commission on School Funding, which has recommended funding targets and a revenue plan to meet these targets over the course of 10 years. It's now incumbent on you to implement the plan you set in motion. Not doing so would show the weakness of SB 543 as a transformational proposal and the folly of all of us who have seriously engaged it. Without serious effort to pass new revenue to meet funding targets would indicate backers of SB 543 never actually intended to deliver a funding plan to benefit all Nevada students. While wrestling with this ongoing issue of education underfunding, we continue to call on you to fix our other policy concerns with SB 543 in 3 simple steps. 1, grandfather existing Zoom and Victory schools. 2, ensure hold harmless provisions actually do no harm to school districts. And 3, eliminate those anti-union ending fund balance provisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that broadcasting, we will go to the lines.
Thank you, Chair Dondero Loop. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
All right. Believing that we have had sufficient time for everybody to call in, I thank the committee and once again thank all the staff. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.